Okay, giving this one another go with this weird configuration. I'm really liking this mic though. It really cleans up the audio a lot, and this angle is better. That for sure. Although it's blocking my view of the monitor, and what I'm doing actually is I am adjusting the picture of my own face so that I'm actually targeting and looking at myself. So I'm having a conversation with myself, which was basically what I was doing before, but the way the camera's arranged, it looked like I was looking down here. So, uh, the mechanics of a very old man trying to figure out this newfangled podcasting business. You whippersnappers. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about this morning is I don't want to be like my political views because that's a very deep and you know subject that kind of implies some sort of heavy talk here. Um, really, what I want to talk about is more the cultural background of my political views because a lot of people just don't understand them. And that has to do a lot with my upbringing, and which has a lot to do with where I come from. I have yet to meet more than one person. I think I met one person from Seattle when I was here. And you know what? They were giving me the Seattle freeze. They're like, oh, it's nice to meet you. And back to their dinner or whatever. That's how they are, man. It's just oh god, and it's the people from Seattle that are from the east side or Magnolia or whatever. They don't talk to other people, man, because you're some stranger or whatever. I think when you come from a little bit more humble background, you're a little more personable because your communities are a little more loose and strong at the same time. Uh, but anyway, I haven't met many people from the Northwest here at all, uh, and so we this way of thinking is actually very different than a lot of the country because to frame it in terms that people in the East understand, we're very libertarian. Now, some of us indeed are card carrying members of the Libertarian Party, but really what it comes down to is it comes to the cultural understanding that we are very far removed from the federal government. That region of the world, which I would call it a separatist movement, except there's really no teeth at all. The Cascadia movement, which are people that are just saying, hey, look, man, you take British Columbia, Oregon, and Washington, this is a really powerful economy here. We could be our own nation standing on our own if we decided to throw together a military and not to say we would go to war or anything like that, but from an economic perspective, that's the funny thing is that the feds, this is the issue, the feds heard about Cascadia and started getting involved in those guys when they were talking about it. They weren't actually talking about breaking away from the United States and Canada. You imagine a three-way war between some upstart nation in the Northwest dealing with both the Commonwealth and the United States of America? It would never happen, right? And we are not so stupid as to not recognize that basic reality. But really what they're talking about is that we're just a kind of a different breed over there. I feel more akin to the people of British Columbia, a different country, than I do the people of Washington, D.C. and New York. They're just more foreign to me. Now, it's proximity, of course, but it has a lot to do with the geography and the way the culture, and this is true of the entire country. How the country was settled really dictates a lot of how the culture of the remaining society has percolated up. In New York is settled by the Dutch, different than the English that settled New England. And their priorities and prerogatives are very different in New York City. They are very class conscious. They are very money conscious. It's not even class. It's just how much money do you have? And they don't care. They just as rich as I can get. While you got bums, starving in the street. And it's true of every city like that. But they don't seem to have as much concern about social stratification as most of the rest of the country does. In the South, they don't really think too poorly about hierarchies, entrenched hierarchies, old money, and all that other stuff. And that's a remnant of how the country was founded, or this area of the country was founded by wealthy British families who there very much was a caste system for quite some time, and it's been a soft caste system ever since, which shocked me when I moved out here. I didn't think something like this would exist. I didn't realize how different the culture would be in the South. Now, Charlotte is very cosmopolitan, it's very forward looking, But you get outside that 485 circle, and things get real backwards real fast, you know? In the Northwest, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. The people who settled there, especially in the early days, the Hudson's Bay Company was the first settler of the Pacific Northwest. They were arguably British, but they were essentially settlers that were assigned and associated to a corporate entity back in the mercantilism days. And the conflicts with the natives were not nearly as crazy as they were out here in the east. When I went to the Cherokee reservation, that was another, oh my god, you know, we'd heard of the Trail of Tears in history class, but it did not sink in until I first saw that as an adult. It was out of sight. The east is very different than anything that I knew. I've learned a lot. My viewpoints have expanded, especially on race relations. uh, I was very egalitarian. We're very egalitarian out there because the reality is, we all, now there are isolationists and separatists. There are backwoods people. I'm talking about the urban folks, you know, that are civilized. You know, we don't care. We don't care what race you are. We don't care really what language you speak, as long as we can speak some lingua franca. And you know, just do your thing, man. You know, and I'll do mine, you know, and the way I heard it phrased once, and people laugh, or they think it's idealism. They take this statement in a long view, but this is really in a strange view, but this is really how we feel. I want you and your gay husband to have a weed farm and be able to defend it with as many guns as you like, and not have to register any of those guns with the federal government, who's going to reach into your pocket and extract as much taxes as possible so it can go blow people up on the other side of the world that have nothing to do with you. I don't think that the federal government has any right to do that. That is a strange extreme on both right left perspective that is very consistent to me, but people here really have a hard time understanding it because, well, are you a Republican or are you Democrat? And part of the reason is because they're always looking at things at left and right, but where we are looking at things is authoritarian libertarian, right? It's really about authoritarianism and libertarianism, for lack of a better term. I don't like the word libertarian because of how it's labeled, but from an axiomatic, pure, clean perspective, it's like communism and, you know, fascism or whatever, you know, or financial capitalism, absolute capitalism. Um, those are the spectrums: communism, capitalism, authoritarianism, libertarianism. But you guys are always thinking about here, for the most part, out here, because you're way up here on the authoritarian scale, and coming down is, you don't think about it. You don't think about the ever increasing, crushing, smothering rights removal that the federal government has been doing to people ever since the Civil War. Now, granted, there have been some rights that have been restored that should have been there in the first place. You know, people had to take fire hoses to the face and stuff in the 1950s and 60s just to be able to vote, which they should have been able to do in the first place in the South, right? And that's because of the way Reconstruction happened and all that other stuff. So there are, from that perspective, yes, there have been freedoms that have been gained, but the actual overall constitutional legal freedoms that people have been constrained further and further, and it's a frog in boiling water thing. And the federal income tax is a really big one. It is a big one. Now, the thing about our dollar and our income tax is that it has existed for all our lives, and most of, probably all of our parents' lives, and probably all of our grandparents' lives, the income tax has. But so it's just a part of life. And the same with a Federal Reserve note. You look back far enough in history, the Federal Reserve note obviously does not exist. But to us, it's always been here. So a dollar is just a dollar. It's a piece of paper we use. But what's backing it and the finances surrounding it has changed dramatically, especially since 1971. Now, I'm not going to get into whether gold is a better piece of money or whatever. I'm just saying that the way that that dollar was backed and what it meant has changed over time. And then when we look at inflation, we're like, why is the dollar worth so much less? It's baked into the cake. The Federal Reserve wants 3 to 4% inflation every year. That's their target goal. Now, how they're calculating inflation is already whack, but that money is worthless and is only traded because of the military projection of and the strong arming of our imperial governance that is out of control anyway. Because where I come from, a lot of the people there who settled there were just trying to get away from all of it, man. They just, I don't want to deal with that. It's the same with California. You know, a lot of those people that settled there in the early days after the Mexican American War were just like the Americanos that settled in Texas. They were trying to get away from the larger United States in general while still being the United States. James Pickering was the territorial governor of Washington State, appointed by Abe Lincoln. We don't have a history of the Civil War there. We don't. The only real contention that ever happened in the Pacific Northwest was the heightened tensions over the uh, Oregon Territory. Oregon Territory roughly correlates with Cascadia as a political entity, and it was disputed between Britain and the United States and consisted of southern British Columbia and Oregon and Washington State, all the way down to California, and I believe parts of Idaho. It might be the whole thing of Idaho, but anyway, uh, and the British and the Americans started to get ready to come over blows on it. Right? They're like, "Whose is this? It's mine. It's mine. It's mine." Right? So the people of my part of the world, they declared 54-40 or fight, or we're all fighting each other and we're all fighting you. We're gonna kill all of you. It's basically, we probably wouldn't have won, but what they were saying was, look, all right, we know that the United States and Canada are way more powerful than the entities out here, and you can take it. Either of you can. We don't want bloodshed though, while you slaughter each other to figure out what the borders are. So here's what we're saying: split it down the middle. Just split it down the middle. The north part belongs to Canada, the south part belongs to the United States. It fits with the current existing border that's over in, whatever it is, Montana and Minnesota and everything else. It fits along that line. Just do that, or else we're gonna go to war with you and we're gonna make trouble. And the American and British governments couldn't argue with that logic. They were like, these guys are getting pissed off too. Why don't we just do that? Well, the real main issue was Vancouver Island, because if they took 54-40, they would have taken Victoria, and Victoria was more or less the capital of the western provinces out in that part of the world. And Victoria is a beautiful city, and it is founded at basically the heart of the Salish Sea, and that's the settlement where the Hudson's Bay Company was, and it has a natural bay. It is like, from a strategic standpoint, military standpoint, like if you're playing a video game, Victoria is an awesome place to settle. But from a geography perspective, it's terrible. You're not going to build a huge city there. It's already way bigger than you would imagine it could have gotten, thanks to industrial technology that allows you to bore through that rock. Because the geography of the Pacific Northwest, we all know that the state of Washington looks like a square root sign, right? And that top part is the border of 54-40. There's a weird little part of Washington State called Point Roberts, and that is uh, uh, where the 54th 40th parallel cuts on this little tiny peninsula, and it's just south. So they got to keep all of Vancouver Island at the end of the day, as we know, but we held out for that little piece. There's a border crossing there for this, like, less than 10 square mile spit of land, like 5 square miles or so. Not even that, probably. It's really small. And that border guard on both sides, they're just so zealous. They'll tear people's cars apart while they're just going down to check out the weird geographical, political thing that is just below Tsawwassen, like, whatever. Anyway, as you probably know, in tectonic theory, you have the giant Pacific plate and you have the giant North American plate. And the Pacific plate is from pulling away from the center of the Pacific Ocean, and it is driving, or depending on how you look at it, it is driving into the North American plate. And in a process called subduction, where the Pacific plate is slowly being pushed underneath the North American plate, you get wrinkles on the top, right? The Cascade and Sierra Nevada mountains closer to the ocean, the Olympic Mountains right up against the ocean, and then way further in, you get the big wrinkles called the Rocky Mountains, right? Geography is wild because of the tectonic movements over there, creates the continental divide, and it creates a natural border between the east and west. And for a long time, it was very difficult to get over here. You had to get over here by ship. Most of the people that settled in this area in the early days came here by ship, going around Cape Horn, or is it Cape Horn? I think it's Cape Horn, the South America one. It's a geography trivia. Probably gonna lose at Jeopardy, but that's a long way to go, boy. This is before then the Panama Canal was built, and then people could get there a little easier, but it still was a long trip from the east, right? Now, the geography of the Northwest is weird because there's a strange, weird little tectonic plate called the Juan de Fuca plate, named for the guy who, one of the two guys that started mapping there, where the Pacific plate and the North American plate, there's a strange, weird flaw, as you know, things do, where the North American plate broke off and is pushing away from the North American plate and is subducting under the Pacific plate. This weird plate, the Juan de Fuca plate. And so the geography is all these mountains over whatever it is, million years, not terribly long, geographically speaking, but it made a big difference, obviously. It's pulling away from the mountains. It's tearing the mountains away and going into the Pacific in the opposite direction of the Pacific plate. So what you've got there is a large set of fjords. There's a reason why Scandinavians love to settle there. My grandfather's Danish. They all heard this place is just like home, and kind of it is. I saw Denmark and Sweden and stuff. I'm like, wow, this place. No wonder they settled in Seattle, because you have these mountains that drive right into the sea. There's a video out there where it was going around 10 years ago or something. People are standing in Busch Art Gardens, which butts up against a weird little inlet into whatever that area is. It's the Salish Sea, some inlet. But anyway, there were humpback whales in there, and they're standing on a dock, and these whales are out there 15 or 20 feet, maybe not even that far, and they're doing their thing where they're popping up and looking, and they're coming back down, and the whole thing. And people are freaking out. Wow, there's whales right here in the Busch Art Gardens in this tourist destination. There are freaking humpback whales right there. And it went around, and people are like, that is fake as hell. There's no way. I'm telling you, I looked at that. That is absolutely real, because those mountains, they just zoop. That's probably 100-foot water down there. Those animals, that's tight. I'm sure it's like, oh, let's go see what's up in here. But they could get in and out of there okay, because the fjords are sharp, and the geography is fresh, especially with all those islands. On the American side, they're called the San Juan Islands, and on the Canadian side, they're called the Gulf Islands. They're the same geographical feature, though. And all those islands in general are all weird, rocky and stuff, because they're gravel, essentially, that have broken away as the plate has pulled away from the mountains that it was. It's in that, especially up where Victoria is, there's not a lot of dirt on the ground, and there is, but you hit bedrock real fast. So in the modern era, Victoria was not a huge loss for us when the U.S. gave them that to them as a concession. So that's why Vancouver Island stretches into what you would think should be American territory, is because we got Tacoma and Seattle, and they got Vancouver and Victoria. Vancouver is a big city. I think it's the third or fourth largest city in Canada. Now, Canada's not a big nation. It's about a tenth of our population, but it's also mostly ice for now. But it's at the head of the Fraser River, and the Fraser River is big. It's not Mississippi big, but it is a large river, and that whole area is one big farmland, right? But it goes right up to the mountains. Vancouver, strangely enough, doesn't even have a freeway that goes through it. You have to stay on highways. It's a pain in the ass if you want to go to Whistler. Whistler these mountains are gorgeous. They stretch to the sky. Huge snow-capped mountains. You go up to this ski resort. I went up there one summer. I don't ski, but I did want to check it out, and summer was the time to do it. There was a BMX competition out there the time I went, which was fun. But it's these gorgeous, gorgeous mountains that touch the sea. The Olympic mountain range, the mountains that head the Sunshine Coast, they call it, heading up into Canada all the way up to the Panhandle, and it continues like that. The geography is, and I miss it. I will say that, man. I didn't realize think I'd miss it as much as I do, but it occurs to me how much I miss it now. But it's hard to settle there and make large cities. The city of Seattle is, I think they had the oldest floating pontoon bridge, the concrete pontoon bridge that was ever made. That went over Lake Washington to connect Seattle to Bellevue, because Seattle is built on this strip of land between the Puget Sound, and they built it there because of Elliott Bay, but they had to literally blow up with dynamite a bunch of hills to be able to make room for a city. I don't know why they built a city there, honestly, but they took all the gravel and fill and then pushed it out into the ocean so they could then build people on. And then when you hear about things like underground Seattle and the Great Seattle Fire and stuff, and Skid Row comes from Seattle because the streets were so muddy you could literally skid a log down the street. Um, the city of Seattle, when they built it, started sinking because they built it on that fill. And to this day, you can tour places where after the Seattle fire, they just thought, well, half the city is already buried in muck. Let's just they actually already had walkways on the second floor on a lot of these buildings. So they just completed the street using wood and iron. This is before cars, of course. And things have changed obviously since then. But there are tours you can take of these underground areas that are just basically buried over city, like windows, shop windows and stuff, they're basements in modern buildings, right? Um, but it was a pain in the ass to settle there. And Seattle is built on hills. So you're immediately like up against the hill, First Hill, Capitol Hill, all those. And then it goes down on the other side and you see Lake Washington. And Lake Washington is big too. So the reason they built that pontoon bridge, the concrete pontoon bridge, is because you'd have to go around on 485 now to get to Bellevue. It was basically a whole day's travel to get over there in the old days, right? And then on the other side of Bellevue is Lake Sammamish up on a plateau. This whole place is a geographical nightmare from a point of settling, right? And it's like that throughout the Pacific Northwest. It's a little easier down in Oregon in the Willamette Valley and stuff. But if you've ever been to Portland, just driving through Portland on the freeways, you're on one side of the river and you're following the freeway and suddenly you're heading in a different direction and you're on the other side of the river. You didn't change lanes or anything. They have this network of awfulness down there trying to navigate the geography of the river there, but at least it's more of a valley. But I had a friend of mine, his dad worked at the Department of Transportation, and he put it this way: there's only so much you can build between mountains and bodies of water like that, right? So it can never spread out in the way that, say, Atlanta can or Charlotte can or whatever. There's sprawl, of course, but it's all going north and south because they built it to Snoqualmie. I couldn't believe it when I read that there's Snoqualmie Village. Come build a house. I'm like, you're going to be up almost, whatever it is, 1,000, maybe 1,500 feet above sea level living up there. It's going to be cold on the plateau up there. And then you're heading towards the passes. It is rough terrain, to say the least, but it's beautiful. It is. Part of the reason why it's so expensive, though, is because there's only so much land to go around. So the people who settled there were willing to put up with the weather. First of all, the weather's nice in that you'll survive it, but it's gray all the time. The city of Seattle has something like 5 times the national suicide rate because, and I'm telling you, growing up there even, I remember one time I left to go visit my mom who moved to Montana. It was July and I could see my breath and I'm like, this city sucks, man. I was so upset because I'm like, I just had it. It's been that way. People move there in the summer. They're like, it's not as bad as people say. Move here in January. Talk to me in February, March, April, May, when it should be sunny out and everybody else is talking about how they're getting ready for summer vacation and you're still putting on your over jacket, But it very rarely dips below freezing. And the Northwest is anthropologically interesting because it is the most complex feudal society that has ever been studied that did not rely upon agriculture. They did not have to grow anything in this part of the world. The natives didn't. They could fish all day long. That there's plenty of natural growing berries and all sorts of plants and stuff, tubers and stuff. Now, obviously, planting a farm is more efficient, but they didn't need to. In fact, there was so much food that if you were eating mussels and clams, you were considered low. You were picking food up off the ground, is how the natives call it. They call it beach food. It's a verdant, lush rainforest area that, while the weather sucks, as long as you have shelter of some minor shelter, you're not going to freeze to death. You'll never freeze to death walking around, assuming you have your wits about you. Now, you can freeze to death. It does get cold from time to time, and I know this unfortunately from personal experience. A family member passed away on the streets of Seattle in the middle of January, but there were many other factors involved in that. But anyway, it's hard to do. It's uncomfortable living there in the winter, but as long as you got a wood stove, you're good, or whatever. Um, but the political sensibilities of those people that settled there. Now, the United States Navy did set up Bremerton, and they built Boeing to, as a place to be far away from whatever would happen potentially in the east. Uh, we weren't worried about Russia. Boeing was a safe place to build planes. Seattle was. And then, of course, it became a nuclear target. We were number 4 on the list in the Cold War. We had a lot of uh, stop, drop, and roll um, uh, practices in when I was growing up for nuclear war. Yeah, okay, kiss your ass goodbye is basically that. But I know how to build. To this day, I still remember a lot of the specs for how to build a fallout shelter, thanks to the Cold War. So, but anyway, but the people that settled there, they were trying to get away from everything. And while the U.S. military did set up some stuff, it was really more of a strategic outpost. And while it borders another country, you can't have a better friend than Canada. It's kind of sad to see people, the current administration, just screwing it up. Canada will put up with a lot from us too, because we put up with a lot from them. Canada's not perfect either. Let me tell you about their pollution that they dump into the water, man. Untreated sewage coming out of Vancouver. Please stop. You know, you're killing me, dog. This water is poisoned enough. This is the sad part, man. They've poisoned that water, everyone has, in the Puget Sound area, that when a mother orca has its first orca, that first orca will die because the mother's body is so filled with heavy metals and other toxic stuff that her mammary glands, as it essentially flushes that out, poisons their baby to death. Every single orca that is born, if it's a female, if it then goes on to have a child that lives in the Puget Sound anyway, if it has a child, that child is fated to die. That's what we do to nature. I just want to underscore that. Because those orca, even the orca are weird. They're not like that anywhere else in the world. They eat salmon and they hang out there all year long. They migrate up and down the coast a little bit, but they usually stay where they are. Why leave? They figured out how to eat salmon. Other orca don't do that. They eat seals and stuff, and they're quiet. They don't talk like the animals do in the Pacific Northwest. Even the orca are a special breed. And the water is calm. It's seawater, but the waves don't come up more than a foot. The tide comes in and out, of course, but it is one giant inlet. It's very calm. The weather is tolerable, but it's consistent. And for people looking to get away from the chaos of the world, like my grandfather, his parents were when they moved out to that area, while World War II was unleashing in Europe, they were looking to get away from it all in a place that looked like home. And that is the kind of person that settled there. I just want to be left alone, man. Leave me alone. So while I hate the label libertarian, that's probably the closest thing to say, because I support your Second Amendment rights. I do not own a gun. I have weapons, but I don't own firearms because they make me nervous. But I support everyone's right. I encourage people to own guns if that's what they want to do, as long as they're responsible with them. Please be responsible. Don't leave them around kids. Don't wave them around in people's face, right? All the friends I have that have guns are very responsible with them. This is how you handle this firearm. You have to treat it right. This is exactly what I want, because history, my mother's side, my great great grandfather, has shown that the federal government can't be trusted with force. He and his buddies went on strike, my great great grandfather, at the Indiana rail car strike in the 1910s. The government set thugs, Pinkertons. Pinkertons were essentially mercenaries that were what became the modern day FBI. They were striking for better working conditions, and the government deployed thugs and basically made my grandfather, great great grandfather, lame by taking his kneecap out. And people died in that protest. People were killed by Pinkertons, government agents. We remember out there what the government is capable of, and that's why we arm ourselves to the teeth. It's not that we want to stand up against the government or revolt or break away. That's what they took away from the whole thing that started showing up in the 90s and the 2000s of Cascadia. Oh, they're going to be rebels. They started infecting these groups with feds. That's what they do. My friend's dad, who was really into Nikola Tesla, got a nice visit from the FBI. Why are you so interested in Nikola Tesla? Why are you reading my reading list from the library? Answer the question, sir, or we're going to get a warrant and it's going to get uncomfortable for you. That's what they told him. And he's like, I just think he's cool. You know, my friend's dad was already kind of riding a fine line. He had this massive antenna. He's one of these guys. Oscilloscope in his basement, had a little man basement that was locked. Had a huge antenna that he would power from time to time. That is absolutely against FCC regulations. He would drown everybody out for 10 miles or whatever with this antenna. When he, you know, if he's trying to get a message to somebody, he would do it. But they can't pinpoint it. And so he'd turn it off and, oh, the authorities would get on there. Oh, who's doing that? Blah, 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 blah. You know, you know, nowadays they'd probably kick in his doors and fucking kill him. You know, that's how they do though. That's the federal government. That's why we don't like them. A lot of people have stories like that in their family history about what the government did to them and why they moved out there. And I can tell you this. When I was 21, a young buck, fresh off the line young man, the World Trade Organization descended upon my city. What is the World Trade Organization, you might ask? Because we don't hear about them much anymore. It's all Davos and other stuff. They were a bunch of countries and a bunch of corporations and some other NGOs that got together and started to figure out how they were going to screw us. All of us, except for the ultra wealthy multinational corporations and government entities. And their workers had no seat at the table. Not a single seat was given to somebody who was just an average person. I think about that. I'd love it if some troublemaker at Davis would have showed up with 5 different people who he called his friends, or, you know, faked the roster. And it was like, I'm a single mom who works 3 jobs. Can you tell me how your investments in AI are going to help me? Get her out of here, boys. You know. But anyway, so people caught wind of this, and it was the early days of the internet, and they descended on Seattle. Something like 1 million, 2 million, some huge amount of people. And of course, it was an interesting event. I worked down there. I worked downtown at the time. So while I didn't participate in it, I observed it. And at one point, I realized, whoa, because I'm walking to work and there's this line of soldiers. Soldiers is what I'm calling them. I don't care. Soldiers between me and work. And I walk up to these soldiers and they're looking at me and I'm like, I work over there, man. And the guy's like, okay. And they let me through. But it's a line of them. They weren't letting anybody pass that line unless you said something like that. And, you know, I was just a kid. I'm like, I mean, if you're going to stop me from going to work, okay, you know. But later that day, I was down at Westlake. And this never ended up on the news, man. This was big to me. I don't know why, but cameras weren't a big deal. You had camcorders like this. We didn't have phones like we do now, so you can't catch the Alex Peretti situations, which is a whole thing, boy, 10 times. I don't care with the Alex Peretti situation. You can try to justify that any way you want, boys. You gun that man down in the street like a firing squad. No matter how you try to pitch it, oh, he was a crazy transvestite. You know, he caused trouble at other events. He didn't deserve getting gunned down in the street. No matter who he was or what he was doing to you, I didn't see anything that justified that. He had his gun on his hip. period. I can understand 1 or 2 shots because you were freaked out or whatever, and it was a big misunderstanding. That might make some sense. 10 shots, that's an execution. And it's a warning to others, is how I read that. But anyway. So anyway, I was back downtown in the middle of the day because I wanted to see these protests. I wanted to see what was going on. It was cool looking. And there's a big crowd in Westlake Center, and they're making all sorts of racket. Westlake Center is basically, they had, at the time anyway, they opened it back up, but at the time it was blocked off intersection. So it was a kind of a public plaza in the middle of the city. And so a lot of people were gathered there, people in like turtle costumes and stuff. It seemed like a party to me. Now, there were violent people. There were people who were breaking windows and shit like that. It was kind of out of control in some things, right? And that's a tough situation for the cops, for sure. I'm not going to lie about that part, and I have some sympathy for it. But that's not what those guys were. These guys were lined up. They have tower shields, okay, 5-foot long shields that are plastic. And they have these batons that are about the size of a gladius. And I use the term gladius, which is a Roman weapon that's a short sword. I use that term on purpose because they were standing in a phalanx formation. They were standing, if you ever see the old movies, or movies where they talk about, the Roman fighting with the spearmen and stuff, you'll have a line of guys at the front and a line that's alternated between them, and they will advance like this. And what they would do is they would have spears. And as the rear line would advance, you'd be fighting the guys in the front, and then these other spears would be coming out of nowhere. It was tactic. And they were executing a very similar tactic. They had these shields. They started out way away from the crowd. And they're in that alternating formation. And they have these batons, and they go, woof, all at once. Shocked me. I was standing up on, I don't remember the building. But it's where the monorail is over this thing, right? One of these things, but it's up on a kind of a raised area as you go up to the door in this area. It's been maybe 10 steps up or something. So you could see, I wanted to see, what's up there. I heard that, and I immediately backed up against the window, the window wall or whatever. It shocked the hell out of me. It shocked the hell out of the crowd. They all stopped talking. Whoof! They hit this thing. And then the rear line advances. Whoof! And then the rear line advances. Whoof! And they start moving toward these crowds. This is in the middle of the day. This was not the stuff that was going on at night. And I realized there were 4 of these groups. Each street had these long stretch of soldiers doing this thing. Every time you heard that sound, woof! Woof! And the crowd started to freak out. Now, some people got out of there. They're like, I'm out of here. But other people, of course, knuckled in. They're like, we're not going anywhere. How dare you? Right? Because they still had the illusion that their rights were going to be respected. And that is the one thing about Alex Peretti that I will slightly fault him for, is that man engaged with those people thinking that they would respect his rights. It's the same situation as when the crosswalk says go, a little walk person, and there's a car flying down the road. You have the right of way. Go ahead, step out in the street. It's not going to do you much good when the car runs over you. Yeah, you might be able to sue the driver if you catch him. But if the driver's a fed, he's going to be like, well, I had to go. It's your word against his, all that. And dead men tell no tales. Alex Peretti's not going to be defending himself in court or prosecute, on the prosecution side either. And these guys start marching forward. Woof! Woof! And then they get to the crowd. Woof! They get to the crowd. And the people, some of them up there, they're kids and stuff. They're girls and, not violent people. They're just protesting. They're part of the party. And they're scared, man. They're trying to get away from these guys. Meanwhile, there are a couple people that are like, oh, yeah, let's go. They didn't understand what they were getting into. So they get up in the front, and some of them start pushing back against the cops. Those guys, bam, with the butt of that weapon, or if they were in range, poof, they get hit. All between the timing of this. Woof! Woof! as they would continue to press this crowd. And the crowd's really now, they're getting compressed. And now they can't escape because these cops have basically surrounded them. Some of them on the corners can get out, but it's a big pile of people. If you're in the center of this, you're not getting away. You're now smashed in a pile of bodies. They compress these people into the center of Westlake Square. And then the guys with the grenade launchers that shoot tear gas canisters start unleashing onto that crowd. And they start screaming. I hear that sound sometimes. I do. Never heard anything like it before or since. Because that tear gas will not hit those people, and they couldn't escape it. And those cops wouldn't let them. They're like, you take that tear gas, you son of a bitch. And they're freaking out. It's absolute pandemonium for maybe 10, 15 seconds. I don't know how long it was. So I was petrified. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, man. And there were a bunch of people like me that were just stunned. I had seen stuff like this on TV, in fiction mostly, or sometimes it would say Polizzi or whatever. It was like some Eastern European town that was freaking out post-Soviet collapse. Not here, man. Not my hometown. What is happening right now? And finally, they let those people go, and they scatter, and people are freaking out because their eyes are burning with whatever chemical they had. Now, they use non-lethal weapons. Those are not safe. People get hit in the face with these canisters, and they go blind from the impact, or they suffer concussions and stuff. They might not even make it. If you and the worst part is, if you die from a cop tasing you to death, and that happens because the taser's so safe, comply, 10,000 volts or whatever it is. If you die that way, you know what the coroner says you died from? Excited delirium. It's not a medical term that makes any sense. But your body just freaked out. That's a way of putting it. It freaked out from the 10,000 volts that was getting put into it by authorities. But the cops are not held liable when you die from a taser because it's a natural event to your body. Your body just gave in. You weren't supposed to die. Why did you die, dummy? That's how they do. So not only did I have a cultural skepticism of authorities, I saw it with my own eyes what they are capable of doing against their own people. Don't ever tell me, oh, the United States military, they'll remember to observe the Constitution. No, they won't. No, they won't. They'll follow orders. First of all, that's what they're trained to do. They get in real big trouble if they don't follow orders, even if they're using their conscience. You know, what was her name? Reality Winner. Weird name. She thought she was doing the right thing. She was a kid. Same with, oh man, I can't remember the guy. And of course, they crucified him because he declared himself a woman later on. No, not Eli Manning. Manning, I think was his last name. Anyway, this is a long time ago. Just releasing information that they thought like this is bad what we're doing, and they nah, and they weren't revered as heroes. Edward Snowden, when that happened, that was pretty funny because everybody's like, who is this high level government official that's releasing all this crazy information? And as soon as I saw what was going on, I'm like, that's a sysadmin. I knew who it was. It was somebody like me. He's a little younger than me, but I could have been Edward Snowden. It was the same kind of thing. I mean, I can't say that I think like exactly like him. I don't know him personally, but you know what I mean? Like that's the kind of thing that I might have done when I was much more young and idealistic and not realize what the consequences of pissing off the authorities would be. Don't think you have rights, man. You have privileges. That's what George Carlin said, and he's right. You know, we have to push back all the time to get our rights from the government. Like my grandfather did. In the Indiana Railroad strike, they got their rights because when those people died, everybody took a breath and said, okay, maybe they have a point. Maybe we should give them a concession because it's turning into a PR nightmare. They didn't do it because they suddenly had a change of heart. They did it because they knew that people were getting pissed. The reason why everything cooled down real fast in Minnesota was because Alex Peretti died. And I think a silver lining may be that Alex Peretti's death may have prevented many more because to me, it started to look like the National Guard and immigration's enforcement were going to stand off against each other. That would have been bad news. Insurrection Act, Anyone? A couple years ago, the national railcar workers went on strike. Almost 100 years, maybe a little more, after the railcar strike in Indiana. And if you look at their schedules and the way they're working, they're forced. Mandatory overtime. You have to work 50 hours this week. You have to work 60 hours this week. And these schedules are crazy. They get like little sleep in between. And they have to move from place to place because it's a rail car system. And they've been saying for years, we need more men. We need better vacations. We need more money. You know, they're just asking for reasonable stuff. You can't run us on a freaking skeleton crew anymore. We're tired of it. Finally, it gets so bad, they declare that they're going to go on strike. We're done. We've had it. And they're not coming to the table. President Joe Biden, Democrat, defender of the worker, signs an executive order. Illegal. Illegal to strike. I got some news for you. No strike was legal. No strike was legal back in the day. That's why they sent government thugs after you and beat the hell out of people. Strike breakers, they were called. A very appropriate name, I might add, because they broke people who were striking. And that was your tax money paying for that, or the people who lived back then. Now, what really killed me, though, was that the union was like, oh, well, that's that. And they made some sort of tepid deal later. But the government just strong-armed them into not striking. And so nothing really got fixed. They got some Band-Aids on their problems. Now, I like to think, personally, if I was in charge of that union, I would have been like, yeah, but no. We're still going on strike, my friend. Declare it illegal. Send your thugs. I'm sorry, that's what we're doing. If you want to throw down with us and make it this a PR nightmare for you, federal government, go ahead and do it. Because you're beating us up because we want to stop working 12-hour shifts and 60-hour weeks. Mandatory. They're encroaching on our rights again, more and more. And over here, people don't pay attention. They're fine with it as long as it's the other person. Recently, right after the second Trump administration was put into office, I was at a meetup group, and there was this young girl there. She was a second-generation Indian, pretty little thing too. And she's talking about her experience at the airport. And she says, I went through the security, and I had my backpack, and I had a Free Palestine badge on it. Oh, God. Oh, sister, what a bad move that was. No political stuff. Don't put anything political on anything when you're passing through federal checkpoints. Why? Not because you don't have the right to, not because you don't have a right to free speech, but when you say things like, I don't appreciate the genocide that the Israeli government is executing against the people of Gaza and taking the water in the, whatever it is, the Golan Heights, pulled out a line, interrogated for a couple of hours. They took all her stuff. They searched through all of her things, tore the whole thing apart, took her phone and plugged it into something. Who knows what they did to her phone? Loaded a rootkit, downloaded everything, de-encrypted everything, whatever they did. All of her Fourth Amendment rights thrown out the window because she happened to be at a federal checkpoint. And they grilled this girl. She was brown. Part of it. I'm not disagreeing that there's a racial element to a lot of this. Okay? But here's the thing. She was talking about this story, and she's like, I can't believe this happened to me in my own country. I never knew. How did this happen? And I'm like, well, here's the thing. This is kind of threw some cold water on the room. That stuff was happening just a few years ago to people who are doing, the kind of people who carry pocket constitutions. People who have like, don't tread on me stickers and stuff. And you guys, that side of things, look the other way. You're like, yes, put that boot on those people. But here's the thing about the boots, my friends, left and right. The boots alternate. Boom, 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 boom. So it always looks like only one boot is stomping, and it's stomping on someone's enemy. And that's okay. As long as it's stomping on them, That's okay, but it alternates and then it steps on you. And those other guys are cheering it on. You ever wonder why there's no significant police presence at uh, an abortion um, protest, even though they get big, or an anti-abortion protest, or let's say a gun control protest, both pro or against, or even your anti-fascism and fascism, and then some strange group of guys come out of a van all masked with creases in their Nazi flags, and they stir up some trouble, and they all get arrested, and they're all sitting there, and the police do not remove their masks and then put them back into a van, and they all disappear. Those organic movements, they don't show up to those kinds of things because the conflict is against other people. Okay, you've already got opposition built in to whatever you're protesting there, so the government doesn't have to step in. Whenever you start talking about the money, though, when you gather together like the WTO or Occupy Wall Street, and all of you gather together and you start looking up, and you're saying these guys are screwing us all, that's when the dogs come out. The fire hoses hit you. The tear gas is launched from grenade launchers. Soldiers with blunt weapons and large shields start herding you around like cattle, like the mob you are. And I would love to have us spend our money on other stuff. I am tired of paying so much in taxes and getting so little out of it. And that's not me talking about like, oh, the poor people are getting food. No, I'm tired of bombing people across the world. I'm tired of securing the sea lanes and paying for wars that other countries aren't even stepping up to pay for. When we left Afghanistan, all those refugees, Saudi Arabia didn't take them. Neither did Israel. These are wealthy countries. Saudi Arabia, in particular, has the infrastructure to handle refugees because of the Hajj. They can handle 400,000 people in an influx at once with the infrastructure they have. They didn't take a single refugee. They all started fleeing to Western Europe and just scattering around and getting killed and stuff. With friends like this, who needs enemies anyway? That's how I look at it. But also, too, I don't want to spend money on it. We can get into you got to stop Hitler before you invade. We're not doing it now. The whole situation right now in Europe sure looks very familiar. The lead up to World War I and World War II in a lot of ways. It's very scary. But we're not helping. And I've seen our interests aren't being served, not mine anyway, by our involvement. I would rather spend that money on a billion other things. And I would love to believe that we could just get in to government, this large faction of people who are tired of this interventionalism and the lack of infrastructure and lack of jobs and everything else. And we can get into the nuance about immigration and whether we give these people documentation or we kick them all out or try or whatever. I don't like that we're kicking them out in the way we are, though, because here's the thing about ICE. That label on their armor rips off with Velcro, and you can put another label on there. You can take it right off. ICE, ATF, FBI. So if you think that those guys are going home when the immigration thing finally dies down, either because the population gets too pissed off or they've finished their mission, they're not going home. They're not going to be disbanded. We've got a standing army enforcement of the federal government. And if you know anything about the way the government works with this stuff, they don't like wasting stuff. They like using it. We got all this stuff that's going to waste. Let's give it to Ukraine. Help them kill each other, all these weapons that were going to go stale. They didn't get wasted, at least. It's a donation. It's tax deductible. Not really, not for the government. But you keep feeding this beast, it keeps getting hungrier. It keeps getting bigger. And they're not actually spending on stuff that we actually even want. It'd be one thing to be like, it's the NHS and my wait times are too long and things are inefficient, whatever. At least they're trying to help people, I'm not saying that Canada's system is great either, You know, people come down here because they need to get their procedures done and they can't wait or whatever. I get it. And there's private care up there and stuff. But at least that's getting spent on something people actually want. You know, I break my arm, I can go into the hospital and get it fixed. My friend got appendicitis back when we were kids. It was like 22 or something. We got it, $10,000 bill because it wasn't insured. This was back in the day too. Fortunate for him, it'd probably be $100,000 now, and his insurance probably wouldn't even cover it. The way things go, he'd pay $1,500 a month for nothing, right? This system is constraining, it's strangling us slowly, but it's getting faster now. And I want you to remember that if you're looking at one particular government organization that is oppressing someone that you care about, or pushing back on a cause that's dear to your heart, I want you to remember the people on the other side. If you're a right winger and you're looking at ICE and going ha 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 ha, don't be laughing when they start kicking in your door because they don't like what they think you're doing on your computer or talking about. And on the flip side, if you're looking at ICE and being like, oh my God, I can't believe what's happening, think about the Bundy Ranch. Because I know you're immediately like, oh, those guys, those are different. No, you know the difference is they were armed. I'm not advocating violence. But what I will say is the Bundy Ranch is a tale as old as time in the West. Ask any Native American about how well the United States government keeps its treaties. During the Truman administration, the first Truman, they were a big land grab. The national parks is a big land grab. Okay? Now, it's not to say it's nice to preserve these things. Companies get to strip minerals from them, though. They just took all that land and kicked all the settlers out. Well, in Eastern Oregon, here came the government wanting the mineral rights. They wanted that land for what was under it. Whatever was under it, we want it. And those people out there are like, no, this is our land. This is grazing land. When we first settled out here during the Manifest Destiny, you said you can graze out here, and that's what we're doing. And it came to a head back then, 1920s or whatever it was. The federal government's like, this land is ours. And the people out there, no, my whole livelihood is dependent upon the ability to graze my cattle. You're not taking this land. And they started to have a standoff. Well, finally, they negotiated a deal. The government basically said, okay, look, we want the land. We want what's under it, all that. We want the land. But we will allow you to graze your cattle as much as you want on this land. We will allow you that. And you don't need this land because you're not actually living on it. Okay? So can we come to an agreement? And those people finally said, all right, as long as you perpetually let us graze our cattle on that land, we'll let you keep it. 100 years later, literally 100 years later, here comes the government. You don't get to graze your cattle on that land anymore. We're going to charge you a bunch of taxes to do it. Get them off. And the Bundys and that community, Bundy was kind of the spokesperson for that community, says, no, we have a deal. And you are honoring the deal. And that's it. And the government is like, nope, we're altering the deal. Pray we don't alter it any further. And the Bundys stood up to him. They're like, hell no. You break your treaties all the time. We've got reservations here. People of Native Americans who are well aware of how well the government keeps their treaties, but we're making you stick to this one. Our livelihood's at stake. Now people are like, oh, those are wealthy millionaires. Yeah, they're cattlemen, but they're not that wealthy. They're not Jeff Bezos wealthy. They're not in that caste. Don't equate that. That's like the kid who gets free lunch versus the kid who gets reduced lunch, you know? The difference is negligible when we're talking about that. Okay. But yeah, he's wealthy, but it doesn't mean he's wrong. And so the government started to come out and round up their cattle. ATF, I think it was coming out there and doing that. And so those people started to defend their cattle with guns. They're like, no, you leave our cattle alone. And so the government started showing up to their residents. We're coming for you. And they remember out there, Ruby Ridge and David Koresh. Now, David Koresh was a whack job. Yes, he was. But he didn't deserve, all those people didn't deserve to burn to death to it, and the government did it. This tale they'll tell you is that he set the fire on his own in there because he, wanted to resurrect from the ashes or whatever. That was the story they told Janet Reno. But there is video of tanks that push into the windows of this place, and you can see the flames shooting out from this gun or whatever it is. They torched that place and then blamed it on them. It was a gun charge. Ruby Ridge was a gun charge. They didn't need to shoot anybody for Ruby Ridge. They just needed to wait them out if it really came down to it. They didn't go in there and kill people. But it got out of control because of the trigger happy feds. And it became a PR nightmare. And people remember out there. So all the Second Amendment folks, those don't tread on me folks from that part of the world, including Eastern Washington, very different politically than Western Washington, I'll tell you, because of the way that place was settled. So they're much more conservative and more trusting of corporate authority, not necessarily government authority. They all descend on the Bundy Ranch from all over the country. Here it is. You want a PR nightmare? We will give it to you. We will give you the Boston Massacre. They set up all their cameras all along. You come in here and start shooting. We dare you, and see what happens to this country. So, of course, the federal government starts killing the cell towers and killing internet and stuff to that area. They don't want that communication going out because they're starting to think about this. But those guys had satellite communication. They had some workaround that the government didn't have. Could they have taken out that satellite? Maybe, probably. I don't know. But that's when you start getting into, what is the government taking such extensive measures to cut off means of communication for, like they do in Iran, when people start getting uppity about the government and they don't want people seeing what's happening and coordinating. So they finally stood down. The Bundys won that particular round, but I guarantee you 10, 20, 30, 50 years, the federal government's going to come back. You cannot graze on this land. And they'll have some other reason. But they are trying to take it all of it. You will own nothing and be happy unless you stop it. So when you're looking at your political opponent getting stepped on by authorities, don't laugh too hard, because the next face that it stomps on might be yours, and someone will be laughing at that. Now, because I'm saying such charged things, I'm going to put a disclaimer in here now. Dear feds, this is not a call to action. I am just observing what I am seeing and my political viewpoints about my like or dislike about the federal government. This does not mean that I'm not going to pay my taxes, as I do. And this does not mean that I have any intention of any kind of meaningful action besides maybe a general strike. So if that concerns you, I'll participate in a general strike. I'll admit that. But I'm too cynical to participate in any of these movements, just simply because what's going to happen to you, generally speaking, is you're going to get shot like Alex Peretti and become a soundbite for some politician. That is why I don't participate. I don't vote because I don't want to lend legitimacy to the system. But I'm abstaining, okay? And I am just calling attention to why I'm abstaining. And then to anybody else who's watching this, if you are a part of a group that's talking about stuff like this, and suddenly a new person shows up, and they're in their 20s or 30s or so, pretty well built, probably wearing a polo, khakis, and some tough, clearly tough but nondescript boots, and maybe have some pretty decent looking sunglasses and a crew cut. They might be glowing, especially if they're asking you pointed questions or trying to provoke you into doing something that you hadn't really thought of doing before. Because that is also how they do. All right, that's it.